Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burtonette, and just want to wish all of you a very Merry Christmas ahead of time and a happy holidays, however you celebrate this time of the year. I hope you have a fantastic time as we prepare for the biggest games of the college football season, ultimately the college football playoff. And in this video, we're going to be going over the road to the college football playoff for the two teams that will be matching up in the Rose Bowl. The next video that I make will either be a quick review or maybe preview or just kind of a look at the Army-Navy game as a whole, the history behind it, and depending on when I record either this year's result or previewing this year's game. Both teams right now heading into it are fighting for bowl eligibility, both teams 5 and 6. But again, this video will be focusing on Michigan. But if you go on to enjoy this video, please consider leaving a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date. But without further ado, let's dive into it. So starting things out, the number 1 Michigan Wolverines, how did they get to this point, to the Rose Bowl, to Pasadena? Well, it all started before the season even began with Jim Harbaugh receiving a 3-game suspension to start the season for, people will make the memes and everything and say it's all about a hamburger and stuff. That was obviously part of it. More so, I'd like to define it as, improper benefits. I think it was an internal investigation and an internal suspension of Harbaugh, the first one this season. And so the Michigan Wolverines go the first 3 games without Harbaugh at the helm. Really didn't face difficulties at all in the first 2 games. The offense, you could say, maybe got off to a little bit of a slow start for the Wolverines, but 30-3 win over East Carolina, 35-7 over UNLV, and then 31-6 Bowling Green State. That game, there were some issues at quarterback for J.J. McCarthy, 3 interceptions. It was really his lone full game blemish where, he throws 3 interceptions. He wound up, these are his numbers for the season, 2,630 yards, 19 touchdowns, and 4 total interceptions with the number 3 QBR in the nation of 89.2. So ended up being one of the most efficient quarterbacks in college football this season. Really, that was the lone blemish. He had a little bit of struggles against Maryland. I'll talk about that later. But overall, first 3 games were pretty much a breeze for the Wolverines in spite of being without their head coach. So Harbaugh comes back. They have their 4th straight home game to start the season, comfortable 31-7 over Rutgers. Then they get back-to-back road wins of complete dominance at Nebraska and at Minnesota, 45-7 at Nebraska, 52-10 at Minnesota. And this is where their offense started really putting things together. Blake Corum, especially at running back, McCarthy passing the ball, and overall the Michigan offense was humming along at this point. 436 and 432 total yards of offense in each of the 2 games. And then kind of the midway point of the season, getting into the later half of the year, you have wins over Indiana, 52-7. The Michigan State rivalry win, I think one of the biggest they've ever had, and the first shutout in a long time over the Spartans, 49-0. And then Purdue at home, 41-13. And then here is where the real season started. At this point, they're 9-0. They have all the momentum behind them. And then it comes down the scouting. And a lot of people are on one of 2 sides of this. I think the fact that they got penalized for it is because they broke one of the rules, whether the rule is outdated or whatever. They got caught, and I think the consequence that they got was deserved. We'll have to see if there is any additional consequences levied out. Either next year, there's been reports of Harbaugh being suspended again for the 2024 season. Either way, certainly something to still keep an eye on. If I can, in these next few weeks leading up to the bowl game, I might start taking a dive at that, but that might be something I save for the offseason more likely. Again, I think there is a certain aspect of that they did something that the rule book states not to do, and it's just a matter of finding out exactly what that connection was to the Michigan football program, because Connor Stallions obviously did that. He obviously broke a rule. It's just finding out truly what the connection is to Michigan and how deep that truly went for deciding what the penalty is. But enough on that. We've heard about that, talked about a ton, and again, maybe when more details emerge, I know a lot has been revealed, I'll talk more about that. But Sharon Moore steps in at head coach, and couldn't have had a tougher first test than at Penn State. I guess the only one that would have been tougher would have been maybe the game against Ohio State. But he steps in. The defense really stands tall in that game. McCarthy was very efficient in the game. He didn't throw very much. Obviously, in that game, what stood out was something like 30 straight runs for Michigan on the ground. Good game for Corum and for Edwards on the ground. There's dominance, really, in the running game, 227 yards rushing, and they end up holding on for a 24-15 win. Really, I think that score doesn't quite fully tell the tale of that game. I think it was a little bit more comfortable even than that for the Wolverines, but a good win, a top 10 win over the Nittany Lions. And then the next week, they get a very tough Maryland team on the road, a really good passing team with Tualia Tagovailoa behind the center, and that in that game they gave up only 247 passing yards to the Terrapins, which I think is pretty good, all things considered. This is another one, though, where McCarthy struggled at times. He goes 12 for 23, 141 yards, no touchdowns and interception. But the big difference in this one was the play of Mike Sainristil at DB, a couple of interceptions in this game, and a big overall game for the converted wide receiver who displays, and I'll talk more about this when I really preview this matchup, Michigan against Alabama, but he displays such an ability to find where the ball is and go and catch it. He obviously has incredible hands, having been a former wide receiver, and I think that's something that plays, a huge role in the Michigan defense, and I think complements Will Johnson well. Obviously, Johnson's able to get the interceptions as well. We'll have to see what his status is for the Alabama game because he was injured in the Ohio State game. But regardless, I think those two play really well off of each other, the two cornerbacks for the Wolverines. And then the big game. The game arrives. It's number 2 against number 3, battle of undefeated teams, and it was a battle. It was back and forth. Michigan grabs an early foothold. Ohio State storms back. Zach Zinter goes down with an injury, out for the season now. Continue to wish nothing but the best for him in his recovery as he looks to, potentially obviously make a career in the NFL, but first obviously needs to recover from this, and I wish nothing but the best for him. Blake Corum punches the ball in. A huge motivating factor for the Wolverines. They pick up momentum from that, are able to pull ahead by 10, and ultimately that proved to be enough. Ohio State comes back into the game. They cut it down to 3, but the Wolverines are able to get the job done. Solid defensive effort. Obviously, Jalen Harrell getting the hit on Kyle McCord and Rod Moore getting the game-sealing interception, and a huge win for the Wolverines, the third straight. They held off the OSU charge. Some other stats in that game, because really this is when stats are starting to matter because this is what the level they're playing at right now. McCarthy was highly efficient, 16 for 20, 148 yards, and a touchdown. Corum, 22 rushes, 88 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground, set the Michigan single-season rush touchdown record. Donovan Edwards had a decent game running the ball, but I think the highlight for him was a 34-yard trick play pass where he passed to Colston Loveland, who was really connecting the offense and has been a connecting piece for the Wolverines all season. 5 receptions, 88 yards, and then Roman Wilson, 3 receptions, 36 yards, and a touchdown. So overall, a really good game for Michigan. And so they go into the Big Ten Championship undefeated. At this point, they're number 2 in the country because Georgia was still number 1. And they mostly dominated against Iowa. They were held to 3 or 4 field goals on offense. I think that's more an indicator of how good the Hawkeyes defense is. And defensively, they pitch a shutout. I think equal parts, it being a really good performance by the Michigan defense, but also a really poor Iowa offense. And a couple of other things. They only outgained Iowa 213 to 155, and there wasn't a huge disparity in terms of third down conversions. But overall, the Michigan Wolverines got the job done, and then they benefited from the next team that I'm going to be going over, Alabama, defeating Georgia to bump up to number 1 in the country, the first time they're in that spot. I'm not sure. I guess it would probably be measured by the AP poll for the first time since 1997. First time in an important poll, college football playoff, first time number 1. So a big accomplishment for the Michigan Wolverines that really, if they hadn't been there the last 2 years, really shows that they are back right at the top of college football. They're not quite, in terms of lifting a trophy, the best team in college football in terms of lifting the national title, but they are right there. And I think this is the opportunity for them to take that next step and really kind of to close this chapter And it's something that would sure be interesting if they get matched up against Washington, because that kind of started this 3-year journey for the Wolverines. It was a night game against Washington. The Huskies weren't ranked or anything like that, but it's a marquee matchup. It was a maze out. I actually got to go to that game with my best friend Joe. Shout out Joe, who is a Wolverines fan, and that was an incredible atmosphere that night and kind of jump-started this run for the Wolverines recently. If you watched at this point in the video, thank you so much for taking the time to watch College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burtnett, signing out. Peace.